are divisible by 5 to result in 9/20. I can't reduce anymore, so 9/20 would be my answer. Okay, let's try one more that has a mixed number in it, and we'll put a negative sign in front just for fun. Okay, so if we were to read this decimal, first of all, it's a negative, okay? So it's -6. The decimal point is read as an and. -6 and 12, here's our place value, 12 thousandths. So -6 and 12 thousandths. From there, we know that 12 thousandths has to be reduced. And when you do that, I'm not going to show you the reducing. You'll have to do that on your own. But we would result in -6 and 3 over 250. Okay, that's part 2. Part 3, we're taking what we know about adding positive and negative integers and applying that to rational numbers. In other words, to fractions and to decimals. So let's write that out. Part 3, adding rational numbers. Okay, so before we begin, just a little reminder, when we add rational numbers, a negative is what we owe, and a positive is what we have. So let's take a look at a couple. Okay, so part 3, number 1, we're gonna take a look at -8/3 plus 5/6. Okay, darn, before we can do anything, I noticed the denominators are 3 and 6, which means we can't add them yet because we have to have a common denominator. So if I look at 3 and 6, there's a lot of different denominators that we could use. But we've practiced using the LCM, the least common multiple of those, which would be 6, which makes it easy because 5/6 wouldn't change. And then 8/3, I would just need to multiply those by 2 to get my equivalent fraction of -16/6. Okay, so easiest part is just to bring over your denominator, because when we add fractions, the denominator stays the same, and then consider our numerators. I owe 16, I have 5, which means I still owe 11. So -11/6 would be my answer. If you wanted to change that into a mixed number, you could, which would be equivalent to -1 and 5/6. Either one would be acceptable. Okay, let's take a look at maybe 2 more. Well, maybe 3, we'll see. Okay, number 2. Let's do 2, a whole number, plus -7/2. Okay, so there's a couple ways to tackle this problem, but you may just want to start by writing 2 as a fraction, 2/1. Then from here, we can look at our denominators and find a common denominator. Again, we want to look for the LCM. That's the easiest. We don't have to use the LCM, which would be 2. So -7/2 doesn't change. These I can multiply by 2 to get my equivalent fraction. Okay, when we add fractions, denominator stays the same. Then let's look at our numerators. I owe 7, I have 4, which means I still owe 3. So -3/2, or if you want to write it as a mixed number, -1 and 1/2. Okay, so for number 3, we're gonna move into decimals. So -12 and 5/10 plus 15.3. So you may want to think of this in terms of money because that's something we can relate to easily. So you can tack on some zeros onto the end here and think of it as, man, I have $15.30. I owe $12.50. What do I have now? Well, we know that we have more than we owe. So we know our answer is going to be a positive. But to figure out how much we still have left, we would need to subtract these 2 decimals. You can keep the zeros or not. It doesn't really matter. Oops. So let's try that again, and let's use the number provided in the problem. Looks like Mrs. Marion had a little whoopsie. I copied it wrong when I started solving. I think we've all probably done that before. So let me try again subtracting with the right numbers. It didn't seem right when I went to look at the answer. So now when I subtract, I would get 2.8. Again, I know that I have more than I owe, so it will be a positive 2.8. This was my whoopsie, so don't copy that, okay? All right, let's do one more and we'll be done. Okay, number 4. Let's do -8 and 15/100 plus -4 and 3/10. And again, if you want to think of it as money, I owe $8.15. I owe $4.30. They're both amounts that I owe. So if I take these 2 decimals and I add them together, remember, when you add decimals, the most important thing is those decimal points are in a line. If you want to plug in a 0 here as a placeholder, absolutely go ahead and do that. When I add these 2 together, I get 12 and 45/100. However, if I were just to copy that down, I would have a major whoopsie. These were both amounts that I owe, which means I owe, it's a negative $12.45. Okay, that completes our lesson. Go back and review any problems that you need. If not, move on to the practice. Bye.